everything ended. I was sitting on my couch with Clara's second phone on the coffee table beside our white mug. I wasn't yelling, and I wasn't pacing. I just knew the version of us I had been protecting in my head was already dead. When Clara walked in with groceries, she saw my face, saw the phone, and stopped so hard the bag slipped from her hand. Oranges rolled across the floor between us, and neither of us moved to pick them up. That was the first completely honest second we had shared in weeks. A few hours earlier, I still didn't have proof. I only had that deep, sick feeling that something in my life had shifted. Clara and I had been together 4 years, living in a quiet suburban rental outside Seattle that looked ordinary from every angle. Beige walls, dark gray couch, oak coffee table, warm standing lamp, the same white mug that somehow survived 3 different moves. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt safe. I thought we were in a tired season, not standing at the edge of a collapse. The phone started small, which is probably why I kept talking myself out of what I was seeing. At first, Clara just angled the screen away when I walked into the kitchen or sat down beside her. Then she started turning it face down the second I looked up from the TV. Then her hand started moving toward the phone, before coffee, before dinner, before me. One morning, I carried 2 mugs over, and she reached for her phone before she even touched the coffee I set down. She caught herself halfway through and smiled at me, but the reflex had already happened. Another night, I was folding laundry when I saw her smiling down at the screen in her lap. It wasn't a polite smile or a meme smile. It was softer than that, private in a way I couldn't unsee. The second she felt me look over, the glow disappeared and the phone got tucked against her thigh. I kept telling myself not to be paranoid because paranoia is easier to blame than betrayal. Clara was warm on the surface, but guarded when she was stressed, and I used that to explain too much. She worked in marketing, and I told myself deadline pressure was making her distant, distracted, and short with me. Maybe I wanted that to be true because the alternative made me feel stupid, but the details kept coming, and they stopped looking random once I let myself line them up. She carried the phone against her chest when she walked down the hallway like she was shielding it from the room. She took it into the bathroom. She checked it while watering plants. She froze every time it buzzed in her pocket. One Saturday morning, I was wiping down the coffee table when I found a second charging cable tucked behind the lamp. It wasn't mine, and it didn't match the phone she used around me every day. Clara walked in, paused a fraction too long, then crossed the room and took it from my hand with practiced calm. She dropped the cable into the drawer beside the couch and walked away like nothing had happened. I just stood there staring at that drawer after she left the room. That was when the suspicion changed shape. Before that, I thought she was hiding messages. After that, I thought she was hiding a life. At night, I slept on the couch because she said she needed space to sleep better. From there, I could see a thin rectangle of light spilling from the bedroom long after we were supposed to be asleep. I walked to the door once and saw her sitting up in bed, typing fast with both thumbs. The second she sensed me, the phone vanished under the blanket in one clean motion. I didn't confront her, I just turned away because that tiny movement felt worse than a spoken lie. Around then, Mark started coming around more, and for a while, I hated myself for connecting him to any of it. He was tall, calm, familiar, and comfortable in our house in a way that never used to bother me. He and Clara had gotten closer through a fundraiser the year before, and I had accepted that without thinking twice. That changed the night he brought takeout over, and Clara barely looked at me once. Every time her phone vibrated, she glanced down, then looked toward him like they were sharing the same invisible thread. I noticed the rhythm before I noticed the expressions. Buzz, eyes down, quick look at Mark, small contained smile. After he left, she walked him to the door and came back a beat too late, smoothing the front of her sweater. The next morning, I found the takeout receipt tucked under the remote on the coffee table. The timestamp on it was later than when Mark had supposedly left our place. I folded the receipt and put it in my jeans pocket without saying a word. From that point on, I started noticing everything, because once the pattern shows itself, it starts showing itself everywhere. One rainy night, I watched Clara stand by the front window, reading a message like she was waiting for headlights. A car slowed near the curb, then kept going, and I saw her exhale in disappointment before she locked the screen. That exhale hit me harder than any text ever could have. A couple days later, she was in the shower when her phone lit up on the coffee table beside our white mug. I froze in the middle of the living room and just stared at it from across the room. I didn't touch it. I only stepped close enough to catch part of the notification before it faded. It was just enough to know it wasn't work, and that was enough to make my stomach drop. She came out wrapped in a towel, saw where the phone was, grabbed it mid-step, and disappeared into the bedroom. I ended up on my knees wiping water off the hallway floor while she shut herself away behind a closed door. That evening, after she went out again, I opened the drawer beside the couch. Under folded napkins was a slim backup phone, powered off and hidden like a confession in object form. My whole body went cold because now the lie existed in my hands, not just in my head. I had maybe 5 seconds with it before I heard her coming back and slid it exactly where I had found it. But from that moment on, I knew there was a second line into some version of her life that did not include me. The next morning, Clara dressed a little more carefully than usual for an ordinary errand. Nothing dramatic, but definitely deliberate. She checked the front window before leaving, and 3 seconds later, I grabbed my keys and followed her. She didn't drive to the store. She drove to a quiet cafe across town. I parked across the street and watched through rain-speckled glass as she took a corner table and kept looking toward the entrance. Then Mark walked in, and even then, part of me still wanted some other explanation to save me from what I knew. He sat across from her first, and I actually felt my body trying to build excuses for both of them. Then, a minute later, he moved beside her, and whatever excuse I had left started dying in real time. I watched Clara laugh with him in a way I hadn't heard at home in weeks, maybe longer than that. Then I saw the tiny shift in her shoulders when he reached for her hand under the table. I opened my own camera to take a picture and couldn't do it. My hand shook once and dropped back down. When they stood to leave, they hugged too long, and right at the cafe door, he brushed her hair away from her cheek. That was the moment I stopped begging for a better explanation and started accepting the truth for what it was. I drove home in the rain, opened the drawer again, powered on the second phone, and waited for it to tell me everything. It unlocked without a passcode, which somehow made the whole thing feel even more careless and complete. There were months of messages, photos, hidden meetups, excuses built around errands, late nights, and volunteer meetings. Then I found the part that destroyed me most. It wasn't new. It had been going on long enough to rewrite my memories. So when Clara came home with groceries, I was already waiting on the couch with the second phone beside the white mug. She saw it, dropped the bag, and watched the oranges roll across the floor while I watched her face empty out. I set the phone on the table between us, and when she reached for it, I covered it with my hand. Then I walked into the bedroom, opened the closet, and found a half-packed overnight bag hidden behind hanging clothes. That hurt differently. The affair was betrayal. The bag was intention. It meant she had been preparing for impact. I left the bag open on the bed and walked back to the living room without asking a single question. Headlights swept across the rain-streaked window, and Clara looked toward the door before she could stop herself. Mark was outside, and I let him in. When he saw Clara, the second phone, and the receipt beside it, his eyes went to her before they went to me. That was enough. I didn't need a confession after that. The whole room finally looked honest. I went into the kitchen, took off my ring, placed it in the drawer, grabbed my keys, and left. I spent that night in a motel, staring at my phone without unlocking it once. The next day, I came back for clothes, found the house quiet, and left Clara's folded note unopened on the coffee table. That unopened note was the first boundary I made for myself after weeks of letting my own instincts talk me out of the truth. I know some people will say I should have screamed, thrown them both out, or burned the whole relationship down in one night. But when the truth is that complete, rage can feel smaller than silence. Silence was the only thing I had left that still felt clean. If you are ever in something like this, do not ignore the pattern just because each individual moment looks small on its own. Pay attention to repeated behavior, not the excuses attached to it, because repetition is usually where the real truth starts showing. And when the truth finally lands, protect your dignity before you protect the relationship that has already stopped protecting you. I still haven't opened the note, and honestly, I don't know if I ever will. So tell me this: would you have opened it? Or would you have left it exactly where it was? And if you were me, after all of that, would you ever speak to either of them again? I read every comment on these stories, so tell me whether silence was strength here, or whether you think I should have handled it differently.